Welcome everybody to our philosophy talk. This is Ray and I'm Shelley. We're from Iyengar Yoga Honolulu. One of the good things about doing these talks is that it gets us out of our daytime pajamas and out of our yoga clothes as well. So we appreciate that. Today is the second in a series of talks on yoga philosophy. The first one was on Samkhya, which Samkhya philosophy, which explains the metaphysics of our practice. And so it's concerned with the substrata below the material world. And if you haven't watched our video on Samkhya, it's best to watch it before this second one. And we want to see that you know that no talk is ever the same. It may be the same subject matter, but it really just depends on the qualities of nature and how they're coming together one day as opposed to another day. And the subject of yoga is so intricate and so many parts that are interrelated and mixed together, weave together. And so it really depends from one day to another what the outcome of the talk will be. And we are presenting the talks in a very sequential, progressive manner. So that's another reason for doing them in order. And we'd also like to thank everybody from around the world who's been watching our videos and taking our asana classes. And so we're really grateful to everybody's response and participation.
And thanks to everyone who's donated. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, that was next. And thank you for those who have donated. We really appreciate it, and we can feel the love, and we hope you can feel our love out to you as well. All right, so Ray is going to begin the talk, and it's called Karma and the Human Condition.
All right, thanks, Shell. And Shell, if you want to interrupt and ask questions, that often helps a lot, because it is a very vast, intricated, interrelated subject, and can go off in many different directions. It takes many years to explore it all, really. So I'm just going to try and keep it fairly simple as best I can, and also because my understanding is also quite limited, so even knowing that, you're getting my limited understanding. And I encourage you all to study the teachings of Prashant Iyengar in particular, who I think is the most authoritative person that I've come across, and really I would say he is my teacher. So let's just briefly go over Samkhya, which basically broke up the creation of the existence, the human beings, the material world, into two distinct entities which do not mix. One is Purusha, which is the pure consciousness, and then the other is Prakriti, which is the material world, which even exists right down to the level of mind. A very subtle form of matter is mind. So mind also belongs in that Prakriti material world. And just briefly to say that the qualities of the Purusha, of the pure consciousness, is permanent, unchanging, unborn, formless, has no form, has no body. And then the other entity, which, they come together in the human being, even though they don't mix, they're still distinct. The other entity is Prakriti, which starts off with the gunas, which we said before, rajas, tamas, sattvas, and manifests out into the elements and the tanmatras, the senses, the matter, etc. So having got that as the foundation, and please go back and watch that talk and do a little study if you need to on that. we go on to the next part of the subject, which is karma and the human condition. Karma means action. What is action? Action are things that we do. So there are physical things we do. We go, we make a cup of coffee, we go to the store, we talk to our friend. Talking is an action. Also subtle action are thoughts. Thoughts are also actions. Because, and even you might say, well, what about lying on the couch? I'm inactive. It's not true, because lying on the couch is also an action. So the human being is an action machine. We never stop acting. The closest we come to inaction is when we're in a dreamless sleep. But at all other times, we're in action. We have no choice. You can't get out of it. Just to say, oh, I won't act, I'll just lie on the couch. It's an action. All actions have consequences. It's unavoidable. Anything I do has an outcome of one sort or another. So this is what we call karma. Karma, actions, and its consequences. So then the question comes about, why is this of any importance? And to know this, the subject boils down to happiness. The philosophical approach of the yogis is, and this also belongs to the Buddhists and the Jains and the practitioners of yoga, particularly Raja Yoga or the yoga of Patanjali. Shelley's adjusting the camera. We okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, which is the subject that is called moksha tradition. Moksha traditions are traditions which are concerned with our happiness, our personal happiness. Oh, sounds a little selfish, I suppose. So one of the underlying tenets of the moksha traditions are that we are in a state of discontent. Now this discontent is translated, the word is dukkha. So we're in a state of dukkha. So this dukkha can have various stages on a continuum of complete misery and suffering, all the way down to mildly feeling a sense of frustration, mildly not feeling satisfied. So these moksha traditions describe us as being in this state. Now you might say, wait a second, I'm pretty much happy, I'm okay. Well, just watch that so-called happiness and watch what happens to it. It will morph. You will feel good for a while, then suddenly that happiness will be disturbed, and that will lead to a state of dissatisfaction that's come out of the loss of that happiness. And then again, the hankering for happiness comes. So we're in kind of this cycle of feeling okay, happy for a while, not being happy and being frustrated because of that. And this becomes our condition. So the yogis are the ones that have decided that this cycle of discontent has to be understood and broken. So then we come to the cause of, what is this? What causes this discontent? So the first tenet is, there is a sorrow. It's also translated as sorrowful condition, which is dukkha. There is a reason for that sorrow, and there is a way out of that sorrow. So this is where we come into the understanding of Samkhya, and then the relation karma and its consequences, and then we get into the yogas, the various yoga practices or yoga practices that are the ways to get out of this sorrowful state. So let's look at what causes this condition. And then you may say, already stop, this idiot is talking nonsense. I don't feel this true, I don't feel unhappy, I feel completely fulfilled. Okay, you don't need yoga. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about it. Carry on. And hopefully we're wrong, but honestly, given the state of all human beings and what we see around us, the suffering and ignorance of the human condition, it's obvious. And so the first condition to being a yoga practitioner is that you have to understand your own state, your own human condition. And if you don't perceive that as suffering, then you don't need yoga. You're okay. So let's look at what this suffering is and what causes it. So in the second chapter of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, he says, avidya smita raga devesha abhinivesha kleshaha. And he's describing these things that he calls afflictions. And there are these 5 afflictions give rise to our actions. What are these so-called afflictions? Avidya, which is called the mother of all afflictions. It gives rise to everything. All the other ones, asmita, raga, devesha, abhinivesha, are all stemming from this one great affliction. Yes, and Patanjali says that this avidya gives rise to the other 4 afflictions. So the question is, what is this avidya? Avidya means knowledge, correct perception, correct understanding. So when the letter A comes in front of it, it means the opposite of vidya. So avidya is not just an absence of being correct. Like you might say, you see the color dark blue, and you say, oh, it's black. Well, it's close to blue. It's, it's a mistake, but it's not really avidya. Avidya would be say, it's white, the complete opposite. So avidya is this complete perverse misunderstanding of the nature of reality. And this avidya can be, let me go to the sutra, it's quite nice how Patanjali says it. Avidya kasetram muttaresam prasuptatano vichinna dvaranam. So lack of true knowledge, it's the source of all pains and sorrows. So this is the cause of our condition, this avidya. And it can be dormant. So your avidya may be in an unmanifested state. It may be attenuated, it may be slightly changed through various practices. It may be interrupted or it may be fully active. So you could be completely in a state of avidya, a florent state. So what is avidya? Anitya suchi dukkha anatmasu nitya suchi sukhatma kyarti avidya. Mistaking the transient for the permanent. So what does that mean? As I said yesterday in the talk on Samkhya, when we look at the sun, we all agree that for the sake of us being able to talk about things, well, let's agree that the sun is a permanent thing. The sun will come up tomorrow, it will come up the next day. But really we know the sun is not a permanent thing. We're not really in avidya about that. However, if, like many of the ancient civilizations believe, the sun was a permanent God structure, that's avidya. So mistaking the impermanent for the permanent, the impure for pure. An example of that is that a man may see a beautiful woman and is struck by the purity of the skin, the beauty of the woman, the enchanting smile, etc. And the men may even describe that as a goddess. The nature of the goddess is purity. However, having worked many years as a nurse and dealt on a daily basis with the very true nature of the manifest human body, in ICU, we don't deal with personality per se, we deal with just straight out physiology. The matter of the human being, I can absolutely tell you, is very impure. So every day we have to wash the body. There's always filth. Filth comes out of us. The teeth have to be cleaned. The hair has to be constantly cleaned. So we are not a pure embodiment. So this mistaken notion and becoming enchanted by the physical realm is a form of avidya. Anitya suchi dukkha anatma, so nitya suchi sukhatma kyartira vidya. So mistaking the impermanent for the permanent, the impure for the pure, painful pleasure. Painful pleasure is an interesting thing. Often we think, wait, pleasure is not, it's not pain. How can you say pleasure is painful? Well, in its inherent, if you go behind pleasure, underneath it, you see a source of pain there. Because pleasure, for a while, what is it? It's nothing more than taking us out of our sorrowful state for a brief period of time. So I might give you pleasure, I might say, here's a nice cup of coffee. Immediately the person will go to the pleasure state very quickly from the coffee. Because the need to come away from the sorrowful condition is so strong that we seek pleasure to alleviate it. Now the problem with that is it inherently leads to pain and suffering, because once that pleasure has proved to be inadequate, it's only been brought relief from our condition for a short period of time, and when it's proved to be inadequate, we have to go again and find it more. We have to again look for pleasure in some other place. This cycle of seeking relief from suffering through pleasure, getting relief, and then again having to try and find it again, this cycle is in itself painful. So pleasure in and of itself has the capacity to be quite painful. Not necessarily. I mean, even a yogi, a great attained being, may experience the pleasure, but doesn't give it the same credence that we give it. So pleasure to a yogi is simply another experience, neither given any value greater than any other. It's just that we value pleasure above others that makes it a source of pain. Anitya suchi dukkha anatma, so nitya suchi sukhatma kyartya avidya. So the last one is mistaking the that is which is not the self for the self. So that gets back to when we spoke about in Samkhya, when we were speaking about the difference between what we call me and I. So if I'm in a state of avidya, I will say, I am the mind, I am the body, I am the senses, I am that, I am the thinker, I am the desirer, I am the one that wants and the one that doesn't want. This is avidya. This is identifying the source of who I am is this prakriti. Now the true vidya is identifying the source of what I really am, which is the constant, eternal, formless Purusha, which I spoke about before. So avidya gives rise to these other ones. Asmita, again, is absence of, smita, knowledge of the true self. So identifying the one who sees the mind with the instrument, the true nature of the self with the instruments of the body. So if you think of the Purusha, which is consciousness and is unembodied, it experiences the creation through the senses. The Purusha has no senses. The Purusha has no instruments of cognition. It's just consciousness. So how this relationship between Prakriti and Purusha is one where it's like a blind person and a lame person. So if you take a blind person, they can't see but they can walk. So they can walk but they can't see. Then you have a person who's lame. They can see but they can't walk. So the lame person goes on the shoulders of the blind person and guides them. So Purusha is like that. Purusha is like that lame person standing on the shoulders of the blind person who can walk. The Purusha has no instruments to perceive or to participate in Prakriti. It relies on the instruments of prakriti. What are they? The senses. Hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch. Then also mind. Mind becomes a sense. It's not really the source of consciousness. It's an instrument of consciousness, just as the eyes are an instrument of the senses of the mind. So, when we confuse ourselves that I am those instruments, I am mind, I am that which comes into the mind, that is me, that's asmita, that confusion that I am the pronoun I. Next is raga. Raga means pleasure. Actually, it means attachment to pleasure. So it's again, as I said, where one experiences a pleasurable sense object, a thought perhaps, a reading of a book, a delightful taste, an encounter with another person that bring pleasure, then that creates a cycle where I feel pleasure, I don't feel any problem now. It takes me away from my condition. Therefore, I should always try for that, which I spoke about before. The flip coin of that is devesha. Devesha is this state where I don't get pleasure, therefore I feel frustration. Then abhinivesha. This is the subtlest of all of the afflictions. It's found even in very advanced spiritual beings. Abhinivesha is the fear of death and the clinging to life, which is an innate, which is in all living creatures, this fear of death and the clinging to life. Now the question comes, what has this got to do with action? So when we look at our actions, what we do, what thoughts we have, our inclinations that lead us into actions, they all, unless we're a very advanced spiritual being, stem out of these 5 afflictions, avidya, smita, raga, devesha, abhinivesha. These things give rise to action. So let's have an example of raga. Now, I am sitting down or walking along, I smell coffee. The senses smell coffee. It triggers a memory, or what we call really a samskara, an imprint inside of us that says, coffee, it brings me pleasure, go get it. So the mind and the body become a slave to that and go and get the coffee to provide pleasure. That pleasure is attained for a short time. There is some satisfaction, maybe not, because you can't guarantee it. And then again the cycle starts. So this raga is like a fire. If you have a fire and you say, here's a fire, I'll put it out, I'll just put more wood on it. So the problem with that is not only does it not put it out, it makes it burn stronger. So what happens with these pleasures is, say you have coffee for the very first time, you never had it before. The very first time you have it, or in my case it was a mango, I remember it very well. First time I ate a mango and I went, oh my God, I never tasted anything like that. What an amazing experience. And it put an imprint inside of me that I have until this day. That imprint is not really a memory. A memory is a memory, oh, I ate a mango, it made me feel like this. Not really. It's an imprint that is much deeper than that. And that imprint is in what we call the chitta, which we can get to another time. And that imprint will manifest itself at any given time, creating the desire for me to again go eat mango. Now these imprints can be activated through smelling the mango, thinking of the mango, being in a situation where you feel, oh, I'm not so happy, oh, but a mango made me happy when I felt like this before. So this is raga, this attachment to these pleasures. Devesha is the flip side of the coin. When the raga doesn't satisfy, or you're in a state of trying to avoid displeasure. That's the other side of it. Not only do we constantly seek pleasure to make us happy through the senses and mind, even reading a book, or the other side of it is we go out of extreme measures to avoid discomfort. Now, the avoiding of discomfort can even go to the stage where we just make up stories about ourselves and about others. For example, that person, I don't like them. That person is wrong, that person is evil, that person, I don't like them, I will malign them. Really what we're saying there is, I need to have that person be wrong, to be wicked, to be not what I like, in order for me to be comfortable about the story I'm telling myself. So we all tell ourselves a story about who we are. We tell ourselves, I am this, I am that. And we are the centre of our story. Now, that story that we've built up about who we are is avidya. It's not true. It's raised on a whole bunch of concepts, inclination, ideas, memories, experiences that have brought us pleasures and pains. And out of that, we've constructed this concept of who we are. That's asmita. So these actions and beliefs that we have are built are about maintaining that structure. I can't go along and really face awe if I look at myself like a mirror, in the mirror, which I don't recommend doing at my age. It's not much fun anymore. But when you look in the mirror, you see the truth. There's no avoiding it. So we go to great lengths not to look into the mirror of ourselves. And that's devesha. Then the last one, abhinivesha, which is another, clearly we go to great lengths not to die. And death comes in many shapes and forms. And one of the deaths that in yoga that we practice is the death of the personality. So there's one thing to say, I fear death, which is the physical experience of death, the loss of your place that we've given ourselves in Prakriti, our attachment to Prakriti. The other is the death that we can have in this very life of what we've clinging to, believing who and what we are. So in yoga we practice dying. So Shavasana really is the corpse pose, and at that time it's the death of the incorrect self, of the personality, the letting go of that concept of what we are, the small self. And this allowing ourselves to die, this letting go of that necessity to maintain ourselves as a kind of construct, and letting that go is really what relaxation is. Often we say relaxation is the condition where I remain the same. Nothing will change about me. I'll just lay down and feel relief from tension. The other way to relax is to let go of the notion of who you are and not try to defend it anymore. Not try to be yourself and just let it go. There's, the yogis say, why defend that which doesn't even exist? So this is a very liberating idea, and it's one of the ideas, this is one of the reasons that yoga is called liberation. Now we talk about, we've seen these, I think it's fairly easy to come up with some actions that you might associate with each of these kleshas, if you think about it. And now we've got to look at the consequences of these actions and why they're important. So these karmas have effects, these actions, karma is action, they have effects. And these effects are what bring us into a state of suffering. Any action that springs from a klesha ultimately results in suffering. So this forms the basis of karma yoga, which is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, and this will be the subject of a talk later on, which here in that text, Krishna advises Arjuna, act in this way. Make your actions like this. Let them come from this source. Then you'll be in a state of equanimity, contentment, happiness, free from suffering. But as long as our actions spring from these, ultimately these actions bring us suffering. So, for instance, let's take asmita. If someone comes along and offends me in some way, says something bad to me or something, and I decide I react to that. Now, that reaction will set up a series of defenses inside myself, which ultimately will cause me dissatisfaction and unhappiness. That's one example. Another one is, I go about the world in the misconception that I am Ray and you are Shelley or you are someone like that. And I relate to you like that. I am Ray, you are Shelley. Therefore, I don't see you as Purusha, you don't see me as Purusha. So our interrelationships keep reinforcing that notion that you are Shelley and I am Ray. By that I mean, as a small child, for example, I gave the example in the talk on Samkhya, when the baby's born, we assign it a name. We assign it, we say you're good, you're bad, you're this, you're that, and we start to give the sense to the child that it is a personality and not a Purusha. Now that will be reinforced throughout our lives. It's been constantly reinforced to the point where we actually start to believe it. That yes, I am this body-mind complex that is here now. These instruments, these dead instruments are what I am. And we start to build our world view around that, and we defend it. We defend ourselves with it. We start to believe, yes, I am this mind-body. And everything that starts to attack that concept, I have to fight against. And I'll associate with people that reaffirm that notion. I'll go to religions that reaffirm that notion. So these actions that we take, even to the point of human relationships, things that we do, create imprints. And these imprints result in further actions at other times. The same goes for pleasure. I went over that with the mango and Devesha, Abhinivesha. Many actions that we do are sprung out of a desire, the fear of death. It's very obvious. So avidya is the source of our sufferings. And at the time of death, of the end of this particular incarnation, we die with a bag full of these samskaras, these imprints that have been created by actions which spring out of the kleshas. And this bag of imprints, these samskaras, are stored like marbles inside a bag. You know, when you play marbles in a bag, it's called a kamashaya. That kamashaya comes with us from incarnation to incarnation until such time through yogic practice we're liberated. So these imprints will give rise to the next incarnation. This is the cycle of rebirth. So at this very moment, every action we take has consequences and will result in a rebirth. Now, I don't know if I'm diverging too much, but let's have a look at some actions and think about them. Imagine that you see a homeless person or a beggar, and out of compassion, you see the person, you'll say, I'll give them $1. And you give the $1 thinking, yes, I'll give the $1, this will make me feel good. Or you look at them and you go, oh, I feel sadness for you, and I know by giving you the $1 you will feel better, and that will make me feel better. So again, that's avidya, because you've seen the beggar or the homeless person as being a personality, and you've seen yourself getting some reward out of that action. So even though the action seemingly is a good action, it creates another imprint inside of you that, oh, I'm a good person, I'm a noble person. Now that becomes a problem later on. Imagine you've built up this notion, I'm a good person, I do good things. Yet in the rest of your life you may be doing things that aren't quite like that.
So the motivation isn't pure
The motive.
when you give to the beggar, in that case.
Correct. It's done for the outcome of the action. So when you look, if you were to give the dollar to the beggar, you saw the beggar, you realised, if I give that beggar $1, it will take them out of suffering. Here, if that was the only reason behind it, there was no concern for your own benefit, no concern with some effect of the action on you, then that's a pure action. But any action that is done for the benefit or lack of benefit of the action is what we call unskillful and will result in a samskara. So that samskara that's imprinted, oh, I'm a good person, I give money to beggars, then later on in life, you've built up this notion about yourself which will ultimately make you suffer. Because you'll have to come to defend that notion over and over and over again to yourself and to others.
Yeah.
So imagine you're in a marriage and you have this idea, oh, I'm a good person, I'm a fine person, and the married person, your spouse tells you, you did this, you did that, you did this, but you have an idea, oh, no, I'm a good person. So there the conflict begins. So all of our actions are creating suffering for ourselves when they're done through these kleshas. So at the time of death, we die with a bunch of these impressions. We die with a bunch of impressions created from actions rising out of asmita, belief that I am the senses, I am the mind, I am the personality. We die with a whole bunch of unfulfilled desires. We die with these imprints of dissatisfaction from not gaining the object of desire. And we die often in fear, and that leaves an imprint as well. It's all avidya. It's all a state of not understanding the true nature of who we are. Now these imprints are like unfructified seeds. They're seeds of trees, for example, that need to be watered in order for them to blossom. Now, if you can imagine that at the time of death, we have many of these seeds, all actions that we're doing that come out of the kleshas are resulting in the creation of these samskaras, these seeds. So think of how many we have just from this lifetime. Now, according to yogic teachings, we've been reincarnated in many different forms, countless numbers of time. So we're carrying a huge burden of these unfructified seeds. Now all of them have to come to fruition. Unless through yogic practice we neuter them, we burn them through yogic practice, which we will come to in another talk. So at the time of birth, these seeds will give, certain seeds will say, I'm going to fructify and I need an incarnation to make that happen. So this gives rise to the next incarnation. Now, if through some skillful action you have implanted some what we call nirodha samskaras, some samskaras that are yogic in the citta, and they balance out the ones that have come out from the kleshas, then your next incarnation will be one that is more likely to be towards a being that is seeking a spiritual life. So a spiritual being is one that has advanced through various incarnations and through good yogic practices in each incarnation has gradually resulted into an incarnation that is ready for liberation. For example, the Buddha. If those of you are familiar with the story of the Buddha, the Jakata tales, where he could remember his previous lives and how through his practices eventually he came into the right situation for him to attain enlightenment. That's us too. We're all going in towards that state eventually. So this is the subject of rebirth. So at the time of death, as I said in the talk on Samkhya, the Purusha separates from this particular embodiment, and the embodiment goes into its constituent parts, goes back into the elements and returns into its dormant state. Then the Purusha, which at this time is kind of stuck to part of Prakriti called the Chitta, comes and creates another embodiment. Now, the nature of that embodiment depends on which samskaras are going to be manifested in that particular incarnation. Take, for example, Adolf Hitler, who did a lot of arguably actions that have come out of extreme avidya, and they have left imprints which will result in incarnations where these imprints will manifest. So he will require an embodiment for these imprints to come through. So these bad actions, these unskillful actions, have led to these imprints which result in future incarnations. So he may be incarnated as a creature, perhaps a dog who will suffer greatly in this life, or various incarnations. So our default incarnation is a human being. We keep coming back. We might be an animal or something, then we come back human being, then another creature, human being. So we keep coming back to this default of human being. And in the teaching, and it's only as a human being that we can attain vidya, true knowledge of ourselves. So this gives an explanation as to why I am like this and why am I not like that. Why are you different from me? Why do you have your inclinations? Why do I have mine? Why do I have the kind of mind I have? Why do you have the kind of mind you have? Why do you have the kind of thoughts you have? Why do I have the kind of thoughts I have? Why I tend towards liking this and not liking that. It's all come from samskaras. So these samskaras have determined the nature of this incarnation. That becomes the basis of yoga practice. And the next talk, I'm not sure, it will either be on reincarnation, the nature of the incarnations, or we might even go straight into karma yoga. I'm not sure, but stay tuned. Okay. Any
Okay.
questions, Shel?
Well, let's see. Oh, going back to earlier in the talk where you said, so if we think we're okay, our life is fine, you know, we're comfortable, then you don't need to do yoga.
Well, it's not really you don't need to do yoga. The truth of the matter is the people that really seek yoga, I mean the real meaning of yoga, which is in its pure essence, yoga means union with the divine consciousness, which means breaking away from the union that we have with the mind-body complex as being us. So very few people will want that. Now, and you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why are there very few people who are really doing these kind of austere yogic practices that were described in the ancient times? And to me the answer is quite obvious, is because we're too comfortable. And Shelley and I, we were talking about this the other day, we heard it on the radio or something, they called it the big sleep. We've been in the big sleep for a long time, all of our lives. You know, us baby boomers, we were born into a time of great material, you know, good times. I mean, you know, we lived in a time of wealth, we've grown up into a very comfortable age. We haven't seen huge world wars, we haven't seen real pestilence, we haven't seen much suffering. So until now, and this is just rocking our world. And this whole thing that we were, you know, that I like to talk about was that our parents, you know, who suffered through the Depression and suffered through World War II, you know, at what stage they may have been young men or women and suddenly their whole life was turned upside down. You know, they went through a depression, then they went to a war. I mean, who at the time of being a child would ever think this is where my life's going to go? Now, we grew up through the baby boom and whatnot, and others who came, millennials and so on and so forth, have grown up in an age of very, not much suffering really for us. This is the closest we've come to a war where we're seeing this shattering effect of COVID-19. And we really are still very lucky. If you think of what's going on right now in Indonesia, Ecuador, India, the suffering that's going to take place in those countries is beyond comprehension. So these yogic traditions sprang out of times when people understood the true what suffering really is. Now we've been in big sleep. We've been dreaming that life is pleasurable, that everything is fine, that we really don't have to have a spiritual life. We can be happy through this physical existence. And this COVID-19 has thrown a wrench into us, has thrown a spanner in the works, because suddenly our worldview has been strongly, strongly questioned. So the answer to the question is, yoga is not for everyone. True yoga is only for those who understand the depth of our suffering that is not only happening in this incarnation, because really for most of us in this incarnation, by most of us I mean those of us here in Hawaii for instance, in our circle, we're not really suffering that much compared to other people. And so we may think, you know, it's okay, I'm fine, I can get through this, everything's okay. Well, you know, everything's not okay. It's certainly not okay for those people dying on the streets in horrible conditions. So we don't see the depth of suffering. Therefore, we won't be motivated to get out of it. So it's only, yoga really is only going to be there. It's available for everyone, but really the people that will really become the yogis are the ones that really, really, really have had enough. They've seen the nature of this existence. They understand that not only is this existence suffering, but the ones that will continuously come about through karma, these continuous cycles of rebirth, ultimately is all dukkha, is all suffering. Once that depth of suffering is understood, then one becomes very serious about getting out of it. And it's not until you're very serious about getting out of it that you will really go to the depths that's needed. So these yoga practices are given for different kinds of people, Muddu, Madhya, Dimatra, Tivra, the mild people, the people that, I'll just do some asanas, I'll just do a little bit of meditation, a little bit of pranayama, I'll go about my life. It's okay. Mudya, Murda, Madhya, the mild, average, keen, and then you get the Tivra, the intense one, the one that's, I've had enough, I want out. I don't want to come back to this cycle of rebirth. I want to seek freedom from suffering. And these are the ones that become the yogis.
So it seems that they're few and far between.
Yes.
And most of us in our life here right now, we're just skimming
Yes.
the surface.
Yes.
And they say it takes eons,
Yes.
many births and rebirths to
Right.
even
Yes.
approach getting to
Right.
that state
Right.
of liberation.
And one of the problems with us non-spiritual people is we don't remember our past lives. Spiritual people can. And they remember previous lives and they remember what they went through. So that's one of the marks of spirituality. It's called vibhuti, a memory that you can remember your past lives. It happens through spiritual practice. And this reinforces the idea, I have to get myself liberated. Now the great wonderful thing that's expounded in the Bhagavad Gita too, also by Patanjali, is that any small step on the path of yoga to the point where you're not acting out of these bears good fruit now and will lead to good samskaras. And those samskaras, when you build up enough of them, will overbalance the others. So it's a bit like a very heavy ball that's taken to the top of a mountain and thrown down. And at first it takes a lot of pushing to get it going. But then once it gets going, it just keeps gathering and gathering and gathering and gathering speed. So spiritual practice is like that. So whatever progress you can make in any given incarnation will bear fruit in future incarnations. So at each incarnation, you pick up from where you left off in the past one. You'll just keep coming back to it. So, you may, for instance, I can only speak from personal experience, though as a young person I was very attracted to Buddhism and went in a monastery and did some practice. And that's a samskara. That's a samskara from a previous incarnation that said, go and do this, pick up from here again. Now, unfortunately, I let it go and got drawn back into the Prakriti, into the Maya, back into the dance of Prakriti, only to come back again at another time in my life and realise, well, look at that, a whole circle back again. And that's what's going to happen in the next one. So what you hope to do in the next one, in the next incarnation, is that in this previous one, you've built upon what you have already done and not backslid. Because that's another thing that can happen. It's called an obstacle. Backsliding is where, having attained a certain level, that we don't maintain it and we slide back a little bit. So in the next incarnations we have to work a little harder just to get back to where we were, and then we build on it. So what we've got to try to do is accept, like you may have to accept, you know what, okay, relax a bit. You may not attain liberation in this incarnation. And in a way, it's greedy to want more than you deserve. So maybe better relax a little bit and work on, to your best capacity, improving your spiritual understanding and let it bear fruit in its time. So this is also, we have to be humble and we have to be patient and we have to be accepting and not greedy. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have tapas, that you shouldn't have a burning desire to attain spiritual enlightenment. But it's not out of greed. It's a natural outflowing of spiritual practice, that one desires, that one takes a longing to improve one's spiritual status rather than going back to how we used to be. So this is taught in the Bhagavad Gita very strongly.
And this progress that we're talking about, is it true it can only be made in the human form?
Yes. So this is told very clearly. And one of the avidya, one of the incorrect notions is that, in this tradition there are different realms. So there's a realm above the human realm, the god, the demigod kind of realm. There are other beings a little bit above us, but they cannot attain enlightenment in that incarnation. You have to come to the human incarnation to attain enlightenment. It's metaphysics. You mightn't like it, you mightn't agree with it, but this wisdom has been handed down to us through Vedic knowledge, and this knowledge is a revelation, and it's accepted in our tradition as being truth. I think a lot of these things through practice, like I remember when I first started hearing all of this, I thought reincarnation, what a lot of nonsense, but I think after a while, if you do, try to practice yoga sincerely, you really start, I think you'll naturally come to realise, oh my God, it's all true. Once you start to break down the self, the little self you've built up, the who I am, this is what I am, this is what, I'm like this, I'm like that, and you start to break that into its pieces and you start to disassemble all that, and then you start to come a little closer to an understanding of your true nature, then all of these things are true knowledge is inside. True knowledge is revealed to you, and all of us have it. So this is why the yogis pretty much came up with universal truths, that that their conclusions were all the same. And those conclusions have come out of accessing knowledge that's inside of us through coming towards Purusha as the source of knowledge. So once we move away from asmita, once we start going towards Purusha and identifying with that and seeking that, then great amount of knowledge comes to us. That's called Viveka Kyatya. Okay, I know it's a long talk. If you have anything you want me to slow down on and go over, put it in the comments. Thanks for listening. We'll be working on asana classes for a little while and maybe some pranayama, but we'll be coming back to the philosophy. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.